We are a few weeks out from the end of the year, and Grace and I spent some time reflecting on what 2024 meant to us and some of the biggest life lessons we learned. I know I can speak for both of us when I say that 2024 was such a monumental year. It was the year that both of our frontal lobes developed, and I'm not even joking when I say that we're both totally different people than we were in 2023. We've made so much progress personally, professionally, financially, spiritually, but we're all constantly growing and learning. So here are our biggest life lessons we learned in 2024.
I know we have literally so many to go over in this episode, so I feel like we can just get right on into it. The first one that I wrote down on this, if you have followed along on my Instagram, I feel like I mentioned it a little bit on the podcast, but this year has been a lot for me health wise. I was diagnosed with gluten allergy, potential celiac. We're waiting testing for that last summer, and my body finally started to heal. Then the beginning of this year, I ended up getting glutened by a restaurant, and it just like sent my whole body in this like downward spiral. And while extremely unfortunate, I definitely learned the lesson of like taking care of your health and just like how important investing in your health is, but especially your nervous system. And that was like one of my big lessons. I didn't realize just how much stress plays a role in how your body's able to recover from different health situations and yeah, just like how your immune system works and all of that. And we did an episode with my functional medicine doctor where she talked about this in more detail, but I'm someone who is or always has been, I guess, like pretty stressed. Like I always have a ton on my plate, a million things going on. I don't take enough time to relax. And it was a really big lesson this year to prioritize my health, but not just like physical health, like emotional health, spiritual health, and especially my nervous system. Because that's made a really big difference. It really has.
That episode with your functional medicine doctor was so interesting, and I learned so much because I've never worked with a functional medicine doctor. So definitely go check out that episode if you haven't already. But I know that was big for me this year as well. I feel like I never thought of myself as like a super stressed or like anxious person, but I definitely found that my habits weren't super optimized for like lowering stress and like keeping myself in check with all of that. And something that I really focused on in 2024 was especially like my morning routine and like how can I limit the amount of stress that I'm putting on my body first thing in the morning? Because I know at the beginning of this year and like at the end of 2023, I would like first thing in the morning pull up my phone and like start checking my emails and start checking
Mm-hmm.
social media and like start making my to-do list for the day in my head at like 5 o'clock in the morning. And then I would be so stressed and just like run down by the time I even got out of bed in the morning. So I know that that's like really big for me as well. On my Christmas list this year, my mom asked me what I wanted for Christmas. And the only thing that I told her was that I wanted a Hatch alarm clock because I want to just be like zen and peaceful when I wake up in the morning. So that's something that I've been focusing on as well. The first one on my list, and I think there's a couple things to this. We can spend a little bit of time on it, but I said that one lesson that I learned this year, not even really a lesson, but just like something that's been really cool for me to see is that this is the first year of my life that I really got to see how building wealth really starts to compound and how when you build your financial foundation and you start investing your money and you start making financial progress, how much quicker you start to make progress as you go further and further down that journey. And I have a couple different examples here on just like different things that I noticed in 2024 as it relates to that. But the first one was that I became debt free at the end of last year. So all of that extra money that I was putting onto debt payments, that money's freed up now so I can put it toward different financial goals like saving for a house or investing my money. So I make quicker progress toward those other goals. The second one, this is something that we talked about in our episode with Kate Raw, but when she was talking about being self employed, being an entrepreneur, she made the comment about the self funded master's degree. And I've never heard that term before, but it like really stuck with me. And this is something that I noticed a lot in 2024. But essentially, it's just the idea of like, again, seeing how that wealth is starting to compound when you become self employed or you start a business or you start making additional income, things start to snowball really quickly because you're freeing up time and money resources that can then be allocated towards something else, if that makes sense. So it's like you start making money doing whatever. And then you get really good at that. So it takes you way less time. And all of a sudden, all of your time is freed up. And that is sort of like working for itself in the back end. And now you can take all of that time and money that you were spending on that thing and use it to go do something else. So that starts to snowball. And then the third one here is with your investment portfolio. I really got to see this year how your investment portfolio starts to grow faster and faster because it's not just your contributions anymore. It's also the money that's already in your investment portfolio. That growth is helping your investment portfolio grow faster and faster. So it was really just like a cool year financially to be able to see that like all of those things that people were saying like happens, it actually does happen. And I got to kind of like see that firsthand.
The self-funded master's year or something, it really has stuck with you because you've mentioned it a few times since then. But I think that I don't know, I think it was such a good point. I know a lot of people do like other self-employed people, they'll do like paid maternity leave or whatever as kind of like their break because they're in there, or like a self-funded sabbatical or something like that because you put yourself in a position financially where you can do that. And I love that. I feel like I'm hoping that next year will be the year where I really start to see the payoff of all the decisions I made this year since I paid off all my student loan debt and all of those things.
Well, I feel like
Okay.
you already are seeing it. Like I wouldn't say
Yeah.
that because I know like for example, you have made a lot of comments to me on like, okay, well, I'm not going to take another freelance client only if it's a position
Yeah.
that like really excites me because I put myself in a situation where I don't have to if I don't want to, or you did become debt free and stuff. So it is like that stuff starts to snowball so fast. It's
Yeah.
really cool to see.
I'm definitely seeing some of it, and like definitely when I'm like planning my move and stuff, like thinking about what I'll be able to afford and all of that, like it's definitely opening up more doors, especially considering this time, what, 3 years ago, I was literally making $2,000 a month, like before taxes. Like, and I was $70,000 in student loan debt and had pretty much no savings. And like, so it definitely does grow. I think I'm getting to a place where I'm getting a lot more momentum with some of the things that I'm doing and really starting to see things build. So I'm excited to see it continue to build. Okay. One of my, let's see. Which one do I want to, my list is so long. I'm like, what do I want to do next? Okay. I'm going to do this one. This lesson is that soul work is slow work. It was my pastor that said this, but it is like applicable whether you're religious or not. But basically, the idea here is that actually genuinely healing and like changing and growing as a person is hard, and it's also slow work. It's not something that happens like overnight, and it's why most people don't do it. And if you I feel like we all know, this probably sounds so bad, but I feel like we all know someone who's like never changed, you know, like they're like, yep, they've been a bully since elementary school, or like, yep, they've been negative since forever. Or we see people in our parents' generations who were like, yeah, they're the same person. They're just as miserable today as they were yesterday and as they will be tomorrow. And I think it's because like actually healing certain things is really hard. And it's funny because I'm like a personal development like obsessed person. I love stuff like that. And in the past, I think I always thought that I was really like putting in the work to change certain aspects of myself. But now going through this last year, no, like I was not putting in the work the way that I thought I was. And this year I really have. The 1 year experiment, which we have another episode on that I've been doing, has really forced me to get to the root of a lot of things. And I also think that I just got to this place where I was like, okay, there are aspects of myself that I want to be different. And I actually have to put in the work consistently to get there and change. And I can't expect things to change overnight. And it's going to be hard. And there's going to be like trauma and things I'm going to have to work through, or just like really hard therapy sessions, or tough conversations with family or friends, or even just tough conversations with myself, and like being really real with yourself about certain things. And I think back on this year and the number of days where I was just like, how the heck am I like gonna get through this? Or like with all the health stuff, like it's because it's hard. Like it's all hard, but like that's just part of it. Like healing is hard, and really doing the work on your soul is slow work, and it's gonna take time, and you have to commit to it like for longer than just like a few weeks or a month or whatever. But genuinely, I think I've talked about this a little bit with when it comes to like limiting beliefs. If you look back at my journal from the beginning of this year and the affirmations I was doing that were based on limiting beliefs I had, because again, from things that are rooted in my childhood, some of those limiting beliefs that I was like working on at the beginning of the year, they're like not limiting beliefs at all anymore. Or, for example, last year, I had an anxious attachment style. I've been very like dedicated to working on that this entire year, and now I have a secure attachment style, and it's totally changed the way that I approach dating and relationships and like my confidence and all of that. And again, it's slow. Like it took a year for a lot of these things to happen, but committing to it every day is important, which is kind of like another one of my lessons on this list that kind of just goes along with this is that meaningful change that actually lasts comes from micro shifts. It's not a big bang. This came from a book I was reading, but I forget what book it was. But like, you're not going to just all of a sudden like wake up and feel better. It's a lot of very small micro shifts, like over and over and over, like committing to like, I'm going to acknowledge my tendencies and pay attention to them so that over time I can start to kind of change them. Or every time I express this limiting belief that like I'm not enough or something, I'm going to like try to stop myself and work on changing it. It's just you're kind of like slowly moving away from something that you want to change, but it's not going to be like a like a big bang, I guess. It's going to be micro shifts for the long term.
Totally. I could not agree with any of that so much more. I think like half of the battle there is like recognizing the tendencies or the things that you want to work on to make the meaningful change. And I think that's hard for most people. I know it's like super hard for me too. And it is something that you have to like work on every single day to like look at a situation. And instead of looking at a situation as in like, oh, this person did that, like always looking inward and being like, okay, what did I do to contribute to the situation? Or like why is this affecting me? Like what is going on internally for why this is affecting me so bad in a negative way and things like that. It's really hard to do that. It's hard to like almost have the self-awareness to kind of like
Mm-hmm.
say, because at the end of the day, like the only thing that's going to make a difference in your life is what you can control and like yourself. It doesn't matter what other people are doing and like how they're reacting to a situation. How it affects you is totally within your control. And like, yeah, like you said, it's micro changes every single day and like working on that every single day. I know that's something that like I definitely realized in 2024 that I didn't always.
Yeah, I always say self-awareness is a gift. If you have it, use it. It's like sitting on like $1 million gift card that you're just deciding
Yeah.
not to use
It's also
anywhere.
a
Like,
skill that you can develop and you need
yeah,
to consistently work on. It's not like you have it or you don't have it. Like, but yes, 100%.
yeah, it's just one of those things that I think, and I like made a video about this, but I think a lot of people have self-awareness, and I don't mean this as like a shot at anybody because it's hard, right? Having self-awareness about something is one thing, but then you have to have the courage to take a step to address whatever that is. So again, like me, I went through a pretty like nasty kind of like breakup last year, and not nasty in the sense that it was like ended on bad like negative terms, but just like very emotional and like completely out of nowhere and whatever. And I realized during that I had an anxious attachment style, and I was like, holy crap, like the same way that his avoidant attachment contributed to this, my anxious attachment did too. And is this the energy that I want to bring into like my relationship with like my future husband? And like, do I want to have exhibit that kind of behavior in front of my kids? Like, no, I don't. I want to work on it. And changing your attachment style takes that, it's hard. It's like yeah, it's a lot. Read the book Attached. It's a really good book, but it's hard because everything's rooted in your childhood and trauma from childhood, and it sucks to have to address all of that. Like it's not fun. But I was like, you know what? I have the self-awareness to realize that like this is contributing to my own pain and my own strife, and like it's not helping me move forward towards what I want in life. So I have to be radically honest with myself and be like, okay, I don't like this. Like, I'm going to change it. And the same way with other stuff. Like, all of my health stuff, I was like, I feel like crap. And like, I can try to just like overlook it and be like, whatever, it doesn't matter. But no, like, I don't feel well. So I'm addressing it and spending the money to fix it. And like, even just with, I know I did the color analysis earlier this year and I've been going through my closet. Like, my closet does not make me happy. Like, do I feel like there's a lot of like content out there that's like, be frugal, wear the same clothes over and over and over again and never buy new clothes? And yeah, but like if I'm being totally radically honest with myself, my closet upsets me. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to fix it. Like I'm going to
Yeah.
solve the problem, which again goes back to the whole thing of the 1 year experiment and just like doing what your higher self would do and addressing the problems head on. But
One thing
yeah,
that definitely helps on this as well is like journaling. And I know we've talked about this a lot. We've talked about it in a couple of, I don't know if it was the 1 year experiment episode or another one, but we talk about journaling a lot on the podcast. But journaling and asking why multiple times, and the why always has to be within you. It can't be like why because this person did X, Y, and Z. It always has to be reflected on you. And like asking, I think they say like ask why 5 times and you'll get to the root cause of like whatever is going on, but just kind of like journaling about how you're feeling and then like actually working to get to the root cause, I feel like help so much. The next couple lessons on my list are all related to moving away from home because that was like obviously a big thing that happened to me in 2024. I'll go through the first one, but I said if you're feeling a pull to go somewhere or to do something, you have to just take the leap and do it. There's a reason you're being called there, but it's probably not the reason you're thinking. And it's also not your job to know exactly why you're being called there. So I think like when I felt called to move away from home back in like April/May, I like jumped on that very impulsively, it seemed like. I was like, no, you know what? I know that this is the time. I know that if I wait, I'm not going to end up doing it and I need to just do it. And Nashville was kind of like the first place that came to my mind. And now I live there. But kind of looking back now, like I do not regret my decision to move to Nashville at all. I absolutely love this opportunity in this phase of my life, but it definitely didn't turn out to be the reason why I thought I would be here, if that makes sense. So I know I've talked about on the podcast before that I'm in a relationship. I am seeing someone and I'm in a long distance relationship with a guy that still lives in Pittsburgh, which is like the biggest plot twist ever. And I didn't think that that would be like my situation living in Nashville. But if I haven't told the story of how I met my boyfriend, I don't think that I've told it on the podcast before, but I met my now boyfriend 2 weeks before I moved to Nashville. And I obviously met him in Pittsburgh. And I met him because we were at the Pirates game. It was a Tuesday night, literally 2 weeks before I was moving. And he walked up to me at the Pirates game. And what's kind of like interesting about the situation is like, I only went to that Pirates game that night because I was moving to Nashville. It was 95 degrees outside. It was so hot. It was a Tuesday night. We almost canceled. We were like, it's so hot. We don't want to go. But I was like, no, I'm leaving in 2 weeks. I want to go to a Pirates game before I leave. That was the only reason why I was there. So if I didn't move to Nashville, I wouldn't have met my now boyfriend. So it's just like kind of funny how those things work. But then moving to Nashville, obviously kind of like what my life looks like here is a lot different than I thought it would look because I'm now in a long distance relationship and I have been the entire time I've been here. But I still think like this experience was super valuable to me in terms of like I'm forced to spend exponentially more alone time now that I live here and I'm in a long distance relationship and I don't see my boyfriend that often. I spend a lot of time alone here. And I feel like that was super good for my personal growth, my professional growth, all of that. But then it also forced me to prioritize a lot more like girl friendships since I've been here. And I've met like honestly the most amazing people. And I feel like there's 4 girls down here in Nashville that will be my lifelong friends even after I move back. So it's just interesting how things happen. And like I said, it just kind of goes back to if you're feeling called to do something, just do it. It might not be for the reason that you're thinking, but it's not your job to know why you're being called to do it.
They always say like the why is not your responsibility and the how is not your responsibility. So if you're like, I want something, you don't necessarily need to know how, like how you're going to get there. And I think the why, like you don't need to know that either because sometimes you do just feel called to something. It could be something or someone or like just like a place, like it could just, or a decision. And you're like, what the heck? Like, but you know in your gut you feel called. And it's interesting you say this because one of my lessons on this is kind of like related. It's about moving. I just saw a post that perfectly like summarized this. And so this is kind of like coming from that post. It was like a quote. I don't remember from who or whatever, but it says the more you involve other people in your decisions, the more you're drowning out the voice that matters, which is yours. I know right now I'm working on being more decisive. I know you're gonna laugh. I know you're gonna laugh because I'm like an overthinker. I always have been. I'm an overthinker because I care so much about things going right and I care so much about like where I invest my time and my energy and I want things to just go right so that it's not a waste of my time and energy, which I need to like get over. But I think it's not a bad thing, whatever. But I think when it comes to moving, like I have felt called to certain areas and I'm still not sharing like where I'm moving publicly because people, if you have looked at the comments on my moving content, you know it's nasty. And I know when you moved to Nashville, you got a lot of nasty comments. And like, I just don't really care about the feedback. I don't care about people's opinions on where I'm going. But once I get closer to moving and I have a lease signed, I probably will share it. But I think kind of like how you're saying, it probably is easy to, not easy, but you could have just like listened to other opinions or been like, oh, like, you know what? I just met this guy, I'm going to stay, or my friends are here, I'm going to stay, or my family here, I'm going to stay. Like just, but you knew something in your gut was telling you to go. And that's kind of how I feel about moving. Like it logically might not make the most sense, but it is the best thing. And like, I don't know. I also think everyone should live away from home for a certain period of time if they can. But yeah, sometimes you got to go do what you need to do, and you can't let other people's opinions get in the way, because the more you ask for, I think it's good to ask your friends for opinions or thoughts, or to talk things through with people when you're feeling confused. But the more you invite in like extra opinions and like weigh them the same as yours, you're just drowning out your own. And that doesn't help you tune into your intuition at all.
Totally. I liked what you said at the beginning. I heard a quote that was like, you being attached to the how is going to rob you of it ever happening. And I think that that's like a really good thing to remember as well. If you're sitting there like feeling like you're being called to do something, but you're like, how the heck is that ever going to happen? Or like you're really just trying to make sense of it with your current time resources, money resources. You don't really have to have all of that figured out, and you being attached to a certain how will probably rob you of the how on how it's actually supposed to work out.
I was just gonna say too, if you're so focused on, because like I forget what where I was doing this, but it was like you would write down like what you wanted to bring into your life. So for example, I just shared that I'm starting to save for a house, and my goal is to save $150,000 and do that in 2 years. I need to save like 6 grand a month, which like is like objectively a lot of money to save each month. But I'm like, the house not my responsibility, it's not my job. But also, when I was doing this exercise before, I wish I remember where I found it because I would link it, but I don't remember. Basically, you write out like what you want to call in. So let's say in my case, it's 150K in cash, whatever. And then you would list out as many scenarios as possible that you can imagine would get you there. So like, okay, I like win the lottery, or like I sell something and I get a bunch of money from it, or like just listing out like I sell my car, or every single possibility, I get new clients and I make this money. And then imagine the fact that there are thousands more scenarios than what you're even able to conceptualize. So if you're married to any one of those scenarios of how you're going to get there, your brain might literally filter out all these other opportunities. So if you're like, okay, in my head, in order to do this thing, I need to get one more freelance client every single month. You're so focused on getting one more freelance client every single month that what happens is you could overlook a speaking engagement, or you could overlook like a cool like brand deal, or these are just like things that apply to me obviously, but this could look so different. Or if you're thinking in your head, I want to be in a relationship, and you're like, I'm going to meet them like through Hinge or whatever, then maybe when you're out in public, you're so focused on I'm going to meet someone through Hinge that you're not even paying attention to people who are around you, or vice versa. You're not, you know what I mean? Or like, I think if you get so attached to one how, you can literally just not even notice all the others because your brain's just going to filter it out. So don't get married to the how, and know that what you can conceptualize as a way to get from point A to point B, there's thousands more options that could get you there that you want to stay open to.
I love that so much. Okay, so the next one on my list is still related to moving away from home. And I feel like this was a very, very big learning. And it kind of relates to like the whole, I also think that everyone should move away at some point in their life. I just think it's a really good experience. It doesn't have to be a permanent experience. And I never thought that it would be a permanent experience for me. And I guess these two kind of like go hand in hand. But I've learned to become like super neutral about the city that I live in now that I have had that experience. I feel like I kind of got it out of my system. And I think the biggest reason why I feel very neutral about the city that I live in at this point is because I realized this year how I love the majority of my life being in my space. Like I honestly am such a homebody, and when I think about what I love about my life in Nashville, it is like my day to day, and my day to day is in my space. I've learned to love my morning routine, love my nighttime routine, love my weekends that I spend by myself just going to the gym. I've really like learned to love all of that, and it's a lot less about like, oh, I love living in Nashville because I love the bars that I go to on the weekend, or I love like wandering around the city. Like I wander around taking my dog on a walk, but I can do that anywhere. Like I just feel very kind of neutral about it. And going off of that, the second one is that it really taught me that I would not want to settle down anywhere that my family does not live in. I think it would be really, really hard for me to have kids in a city that my parents don't live in. And I think moving away taught me that, especially because since I do have Bella, one big thing for me in moving away was like, I absolutely need to be able to drive home. So Nashville's only 8 hours away from Pittsburgh. And literally since I've moved, I've driven like 3 or 4 times, and like 8 hours there, 8 hours back. And I was driving home yesterday because I just got back from Thanksgiving, and I was like, I am so tired of this drive. And it just kind of like has made me realize that it would make me very, very sad to raise my kids in a city that my parents do not live in. And like, even thinking about, being in a long distance relationship now, and my boyfriend's family, they're from Pittsburgh. And like, I want that. I want to grow up where, or I want my kids to grow up where both sets of grandparents are in the same city. And I feel like that's very rare now, but it just kind of like almost like taught me what my priorities were, which also I feel like has to do with my frontal lobe developing, because when I was 24, I was not thinking like this.
I was gonna say, when I turned 25, I noticed like there were noticeable shifts in how I viewed things, but I feel like I just turned 26, and the few months leading up to turning 26, it's like I thought people were kind of kidding when they said that like your frontal lobe develops at 26 or whatever. But no, like the last few months, my desire to be like a wife and a mom and to like have a house has like grown exponentially. And that's part of the reason why I'm so glad that I'm moving away, so that I can like go and experience that, because I'm in the same boat where having all the things that have gone on this year, again, I know I keep saying it, but the health stuff, like having my family close by and having their support through all of that was amazing. Like, I don't know how I would have gotten through this year if I couldn't have just like the number of days that I was like, I just need to go like have a hug from my dad or my mom and just like go drive over to their house was so, so helpful. And I'm in the same boat where I can't imagine raising kids without my parents nearby. And it's just, I think it's one of those things that comes up when you start to get older and you start thinking about what's in your next stage of life and what you really want.
Yeah,
Because I don't know,
totally.
it's just like a logistic thing.
And that is why I was so impulsive about my move to Nashville, and why I was like, I need to do it now or I'm never going to do it, because something about turning 25, I was like, I know I want a family. I know I like want kids. And it sounds so stupid as a newly 25-year-old to be like, oh, I need to do that soon. But like, realistically, if I want to do that, like, and I'm going to say I'm going to move away from home at 28 years old, like, how much sense does that make? You know what I mean? So I was like, I'm just going to do this now, get it out of my system. And like, obviously things work out for a reason, but I inevitably wanted to end up back in Pittsburgh, and that's where I wanted to like raise my family and everything.
I know. I think I can eventually see, or I know I can eventually see myself owning a home in Massachusetts, which is so funny because I used to always be like, I'm never living here. I'm moving so far away. Like, I don't want to be here. Like, because I hate the cold. I really, really do. And I just can't with like how cold it is. Like, I can't with the cold. But I think thinking about like when I do have kids, I know I want to be here. So I'm like, now's the time for me to go pack it up and like go somewhere else when I'm single and I don't have kids and I don't have a house, because I'm not tied to here at all. And I think, I don't know, I think there's something to be said about just like really thinking. I'm not someone who has like a 5 year plan where I'm like, I need to do this in 5 years, because I just think that puts unnecessary pressure on yourself. But I think that there is something to be said about like thinking about, okay, in the next 5 years, like, what do I want? And like, is there anything that I like really want to do now before I get to certain aspects of that? Because in 5 years, I want to be married with like a kid. So now's the time for me to go do the things that I want to do, that I can do, because I'm not like tied to anything else. Okay. Next one on my list. Let's see. Okay. This kind of also goes along with moving. This is so funny, guys. I was watching an episode of Love is Blind. Okay. And if you've watched it, you know the guy Milton from like one of the older seasons. He's just like a character kind of. He's just this like techie, really smart guy, I feel like. But he said something in one of the episodes that like low-key kind of changed my life. And I'm like embarrassed to admit that like Milton from Love is Blind changed my life. But like, if you're ever listening to the Life You Love podcast, Milton, thanks. Love ya. But he was basically talking about making decisions, and he was like, he just said something. He was like, I trust my decision making because I collect data points and then I use them to make my choice. And something about the way he said it about just like collecting data points, something just like kind of like clicked in my brain, I guess. And he was basically talking about his decision to go with the woman that he, or like to get married to the woman that he chose through Love is Blind. And he was like, my job during this experiment is literally to collect data points on these people that I meet, and then when it comes time to make my decision, I use the data points that I have to make the most informed decision possible that I can. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, because in that moment I use the data points that I had. And I'm a big like I said, I want things to go right. And so sometimes I get so consumed with trying to collect as many data points as possible, rather than just like giving myself a time frame and being like, okay, you're going to go out and you're going to collect data points until this point, and then you're going to make a choice. And at that point, you're just going to trust that you've done your due diligence in collecting the data points that you have, and make your choice and then go from there. And if at some point the data starts to skew in the other direction, then you figure out how to get yourself out of that decision. But I think sometimes we get so focused on like getting more information information and more information and more information. And more information doesn't always lead to a better decision. I think there's like, especially with moving for me, I wasn't sure of where I wanted to go. I felt called to an area, but I wasn't sure. And I did my due diligence, I felt like, in collecting data on different cities and being like, okay, going and visiting them and like really looking at it and being like, okay, where do I want to go? Like, I'm still drawn to the same place from the beginning. And it's good to have that confirmation, but I can't sit here and like go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on the decision. I just have to pick a place and go and make that choice, and again trust that it's going to like pan out the way that it needs to. And then yeah, if at any point the data starts to skew in the other direction, then I'm like, okay, data skewing, data is pointing towards this is a no now, or it's not working out. And then at that point I just have like the reactive response of, okay, well, like what am I going to do now? Okay, I just figure out how to get myself out of that situation, but
Yeah.
not focusing on getting so like more data is not going to help, you know?
Totally. I know we've talked a lot about decision making on the podcast, and you talked about this in an earlier episode, but the whole idea of when you're trying to make a decision using looking at like what's the best case scenario, what's the
Mm-hmm.
worst case scenario, and what's the most likely scenario. And I know that's been super impactful for me on like if a decision is stressing you out, like look at those three options and be like, okay, worst case scenario, what
Mm-hmm.
happens? But like best case scenario, this happens, but also like most likely, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that gives me so much peace of mind.
It's really, I think a therapist told me that a few years ago, and it really changed my life because I think our brains just naturally our brain's job is to protect us and keep us safe. And so when there's, what do they call them? Like when there's something that it perceives as a threat, our brain starts to go into like this mode to protect us. And a lot of time it does that by catastrophizing, I think is the word. So it like blows the whole situation out of proportion. So for me, for example, with moving, this is something I had to work through this year. I was viewing moving and my brain would immediately get scared because I don't really know why, but big changes in physical location are a trigger for my anxiety. So like when I moved into college, when I moved home from college, it didn't happen when I moved into this apartment because I've been like working on it for years, but it's been an issue. So I think my brain started to perceive moving as a threat. So my brain started spiraling and being like, okay, like thinking of all the bad things that could happen, or what if I move and I sign a lease and then I go broke? And like, even though there's no evidence like that I would go broke, like my brain was starting to go in that direction. So I'm like, okay, what's the absolute best case scenario, worst case scenario, and most likely? Like in the absolute worst case scenario, like I go there, I do go broke, I have to break my lease, use my emergency fund, and move back home. Whoop-de freaking do. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's really not that bad, like, when you really think about it. Like, in the worst case scenario, I'm not ending up like homeless or without shelter, or you know what I mean? Like it's really not as bad as you perceive it. And my friend is moving from Massachusetts down to Charlotte in February. We were talking through the same thing. I was like, what's like the worst case scenario? You hate it, you break your lease and you go back to your parents' house. And she was like, wow, I guess when you think about it that way, like it's really not that bad. And I was like, you go down, everybody hates you, you make no friends, like whatever. But then when you actually start to say that out loud, you're like,
You're like, that's
what are the
ridiculous.
what are the odds that everybody in the city of Charlotte hates me? You know what I mean? And so I
Yes.
started thinking about that with the place that I'm moving to. I'm like, yeah, what are the odds that like literally everything goes left, not a single thing goes right? Like it's actually a really, 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 really small chance that everything goes wrong. And that's the worst case scenario. So yeah, that's like a really helpful thing in thinking through all the decisions that you make for sure.
Yes, definitely. This is like reminding me of so many other life lessons I learned in 2024. And one of them is actually something that I think about very often. And I was just talking to one of my best friends about this because she was talking about how like she has been feeling very anxious lately and kind of like getting to the root cause of that. It's because of things that like might potentially happen in the future. And I heard something this year that said true happiness comes from spending most of your time in the present, like the more time that you can spend in the present and the least amount of time that you can spend in the past and in the future is what dictates how happy you are. And so essentially what that means is if you spend most of your time worrying about something that could potentially happen in the future, or on the flip side, being really excited about something that's maybe going to happen in the future, or something that's definitely going to happen in the future, or in the past, if you're stressing about something that happened in the past, or if you, I guess that like not so much positive things that happened in the past, but if you're like stressing about things that happened in the past, that is robbing you of so much of your happiness. The more time that you can spend just like being in the present and not stressing about things that probably aren't even going to happen, because like you just said, it's your brain's way of kind of like hedging that situation, because when that situation maybe does come up, you like theoretically know how to handle it, but that's your brain's way of kind of like hedging that situation. So stop stressing about things that probably aren't even going to happen in the future and just spend more time being in the present and like actually enjoying your day to day. And that's what dictates true happiness.
I have 3 life lessons that literally go along with this. They're like short ones, but
Yeah, just
one,
read them.
no, like, okay, because it just like ties into this so well. One of them is let it play out and don't borrow grief from the future. I saw that most of these are from social media, like they're quotes from social media. I'm not even playing you. They're just things I've learned this year that really stuck with me. But I mean, I feel like there's a big theme in a lot of this of like overthinking and my own thoughts and things like that. Like thinking about it, like don't borrow grief from the future, like let it play out, like just enjoy it. One of my friends who he's like a breakthrough coach, Taylor Nardoni. He's amazing. He always used to say to me, life is a surprise party. Don't spoil it. And it kind of goes along with that is like, don't try to like predict what's going to happen in the future or like be worried about what's happening in the future. Like it's meant to be a surprise party for you. And the more you're trying to like spoil it, you're just like it's imagine you being life and like you're planning something for a person, right? And that person keeps trying to predict it. If I was life, universe, God, whatever in that situation, I'd be like, enough. You know what I mean? I'm like, I'm trying to plan a surprise party for you and you keep ruining it and it's really pissing me off, you know? And I just let things play out. But also, I read a book this year. I've read it twice now. It's called Don't Believe Everything You Think. And it is so, so good. And I'm going to spoil like one little part of it. It's still super impactful to read. It's a quick read. Everyone should read it. But one of the things he says is that thinking is the root cause of suffering. And that was so profound to me. He basically talks about the difference between a thought and thinking. And he was like, you can have a thought and just not give it any meaning. And when you do that, it just like, okay, cool, thought just passes through my head. Where shit starts to go left is when you start thinking, because you're starting to think about it, whatever. So you can be like, oh yeah, I can't wait to buy a house. And or you can be like, I can't wait to buy a house, but then how am I going to save and how am I going to this and that? And it just starts to spiral because you're spending so much time like worried about what is going to happen and how it's going to happen versus just focusing on the thought that comes to your head. Or like, oh, I don't like my space or I do like my space or whatever. Okay, just let those thoughts be thoughts. You don't have to like give them any meaning. I don't know. It's really profound, but it forces you to basically stay in the present.
Yeah, definitely. I can move on to my next one. This is kind of related, but also a little bit different. This one's more money related. Obviously, we talk a lot about money on the podcast, but I heard a quote this year from another podcast. I can't remember which one, but it really stuck with me. I listened to this podcast like very early on in the year, so I'm still thinking about it. The quote says, money loves speed, wealth loves time, poverty loves indecision. And obviously we're talking a lot about decision making in this episode, and I feel like this kind of goes hand in hand. But I think like overarchingly, obviously you're not going to get rich quick, right? Like building wealth takes time. It takes like consistent action over a lot of years. We're not sitting here teaching you how to get rich quick on this podcast. However, money loving means that most people don't make money because they don't take action on anything. I think a lot of times if we like have an idea for a side hustle that we want to do or maybe a business that we want to start, our brains automatically kind of go to like, well, if this was actually a good idea, everyone would be doing it. And so it must not be a good idea and I'm not going to take action on it. But what separates people who do go down kind of like the entrepreneurial path or do find like success beyond like what the average person does, they're taking action and they're taking consistent action. So that's kind of what separates like the haves and the haves nots almost. I'm kind of like related to this quote, but yeah, it's just kind of the idea that like if you have something that you want to do, not kind of like talking yourself out of it and allowing yourself to take action, because at the end of the day, like if something that you had an idea for doesn't work out and you took action on it and it didn't work out, you're going to learn a lot of lessons in trying it that's going to help you for the next idea that you have. And if that doesn't work out, that's going to teach you a lot of lessons. That's going to teach you something for the next idea that you're going to play out.
And now you have clarity that it didn't work out. Because then otherwise you're just going to sit there and wonder and wonder and wonder, you know? I've heard these stories of people who have really cool business ideas and then they don't act on them. And then a couple of years down the line, someone basically launches a business with that exact idea simply because 2 people had the same idea. And then that first person is like, dang it, I literally had that idea years ago and I never acted on it. And now someone else is successful with the same thing. And I feel like I don't know, just like taking action and again letting it play out and just seeing rather than knowing like what the solution or what the response is going to be is
Yeah.
important. And we've talked about this a few times. I feel like the opportunity cost of sitting and not taking action, like if you choose to not, if you have an idea and you don't take action on it, then you're going to end up just wasting time thinking about it. And the way that I like to view it is I'm like, what's my hourly rate for anything? The more time I sit there doing nothing, it's an opportunity cost. And I'm not talking about doing nothing in the sense of like relaxing. I think everyone should relax and whatever, but I'm talking about like ruminating on an idea or something. Like you're basically charging yourself for, so like let's say I value my time at $150 an hour. If I sit there and ruminate for 2 hours, I just lost $300 of my own time doing nothing. As where if I had just like put something out there, maybe I could have made $300 from it or gotten like value from it that was worth my time or more. So I feel like thinking about how you value your time and not wasting it. Don't waste your own time.
Totally. Ideas are so abundant, but the execution piece is what most people are missing. And this is something that I've learned. I'm going to like use the example of like being a content creator in social media, but obviously this can be applied to whatever you're trying to do. I feel like at the beginning of this year, I spent exponentially more time just like writing down a bunch of content ideas and being like, I need like more ideas. And I'm going to sit here and like think of video ideas. No, you need one idea and then you need to execute on that idea and then you need another idea and execute on that idea. Like
Mm-hmm.
take it one by one. So whatever you're trying to do, like you have a million ideas. You just need to make the best informed decision on which one you're going to try to play out. And then if that doesn't work, move on to the next thing.
And also, I feel like ideas are fleeting. Where, like, one of my clients, we did an interview with a creator, and she was talking about creating content and talking about how, like, if she has an idea, she will just try to, like, produce it as quickly as possible, basically, because otherwise she'll, like, add it to this ideas list. And then she'll be like, a week later, she's like, I don't like that idea because I thought too hard about it. And now I'm like, how do I execute? Oh, well, like, is that going to be a good idea? Like, you'll sit there and think too hard about it versus if you just, like, put it out there or go for whatever it is. Obviously, we talk about this in terms of like a content lens a lot because we are creators, but it could be anything. If you're like, I want to try a side hustle, like go do it, like figure it out, or if you're like, I want to get my finances together and I'm not sure like what kind of budget system I want to use. Go just try one or test an idea and see before you like sit there and overthink it. Okay. Next one on my list. What do I want to choose? There's so many here. Let's see. Okay. One that I really like on my list is comfort creates self-care, discomfort creates self-respect. This is another like again quote that I saw but I think was a good lesson and a good theme for me this year. I feel like obviously self-care is very important and keeping yourself comfortable and all those things is great, but really developing confidence and self-respect I think does come from a lot of like discomfort, like doing the things that maybe you really don't want to do or pushing yourself harder than you think, but coming out on the other side of it is like it's I think feel like what's builds what oh my gosh I can't talk hello what builds self-respect and confidence. There's a quote also that says like confidence comes from showing up for yourself or doing the things you say you're going to do. And I think about that a lot because how can you have confidence or self respect if you don't even follow through with what you say you're going to do, or if you don't do the things that you know you should do to get to where you want to be, or the things that you say you want to do? Like, if you're always just kind of pushing those things to the side, then like, do you really respect yourself? And that was kind of like a mindset shift for me because I am someone who I will put anybody else before me. It doesn't matter who it is. And I will like push aside my own, like I could have a plan for the day and it can involve me going to the gym at the end of the day after work. And if someone asks something of me of like, hey, can you like hop on FaceTime? I just want to chat or I'm having a hard day. I will immediately remove the things that are for me or that I said I was going to do that day to be able to accommodate somebody else or get a piece of work done faster for somebody or whatever. And this year I've really tried to work on being like if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And even like delaying plans, like I've had people who I've talked about my faith journey a little bit on social media. I don't do it a lot because it gets a lot of hate. But I have been like connecting back to my faith as a Christian, and I watch a live stream of church every Sunday. And there's been people who've like, oh, do you want to go to brunch? And I'm like, I'm only free after this time. Like, I'm not like, yeah, whatever time works. I'm like, no, I'm going to church and like that's what I'm doing. So we can meet after that. And I think that has helped me develop my sense of self-confidence and makes me feel way more accomplished because I'm prioritizing the things I say I'm going to and the things that are really important to me. And it's uncomfortable sometimes because, again, sometimes I'm like, hey, no, I can't come because I'm going to the gym. Or like, oh, I have Pilates, so like that night doesn't work for me for dinner or whatever. And sometimes that means that like that week doesn't work to get the whole friend group together for dinner. We'll try again next week. But what I say I'm going to do and the things I'm doing for myself is equally, if not more important than my other obligations.
I wholeheartedly agree with this. I feel like this was a huge year for me as well in terms of like essentially what you're talking here is like sticking to your habits and routines. And this was a big year for me in that regard as well. The two big ones for me this year were keeping my space organized and also feeling good about myself every day in terms of like getting ready every day because I've been working from home for like 3 years and I feel like the last 2 years I would just lay around in sweatpants all day or like work
Mm-hmm.
from my bed. And I've been so much better about that in 2024. Just like I have a little bit of makeup on today. I like washed my hair this morning so it's not in a ratty bun. But just yeah, kind of like sticking to your habits and routines. You develop so much more confidence and like you're probably underestimating how not sticking to your habits and routines in one or two areas of your life is trickling into all of the other areas in your life. Because before I was like, who cares that I can't keep my apartment organized? Like I go to the gym every day. So like who cares? Like, you know what I mean? But it does impact every area of your life. So yeah, totally agree with that with like the self-respect and the confidence aspect. The last one on my list that I want to talk about, because we're almost out of time here, unless you have one more that you really want to talk about as well. I feel like this is kind of a good one to end on because kind of relates to the podcast as well. And I know we've talked about this a lot, kind of reflecting on obviously, this is the first year that we have been podcasters. We've been doing this for like right over a year. And I feel like we've grown so much. But something that I learned this year was that diluted focus gives diluted results. And I think prior to 2024, I was definitely more in the boat of like, diversify your income, have a bunch of income streams. Like you don't want to rely on one thing and like being self-employed, obviously that's important. You don't want to like put all of your eggs in one basket and then if it doesn't work out. But I've also definitely seen this year how this quote is true. For example, with the podcast, like Grace and I love doing the podcast. Like I love coming on here and chatting every single week and like you guys have been really receptive of the podcast and I do feel like we've grown a lot, but Grace and I don't make even $1 from the podcast. This is a hobby. Since we don't make money from it, it has to be considered a hobby and it's a fun hobby and we thoroughly enjoy it. However, the reason why it's a hobby is because we treat it like a hobby. We both have a million things going on and like admittedly our focus on the podcast has been diluted and that gives diluted results. So I think that I'm just using the podcast as an example, but I think that that's like a really good thing to keep in mind if you're trying to go after something. Like don't put too much on your plate, don't spread yourself too thin. At the end of the day, you can only have one thing that's like the main source of your energy and your thoughts. Like when you're in the shower, what are you thinking about? It can't be more than one thing, you know what I mean? So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that I definitely learned that lesson this year.
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, we do love the podcast. It's also, when you started talking about this in the podcast, I thought you were going to talk about how we like, when we started the podcast, we were like, okay, this is going to be like for fun or whatever. And then a few months into it, we were like, okay, well, no, we need to get a newsletter and we need to like have this like killer social media strategy. And we should probably put everything on YouTube too. And then maybe we should like have a Facebook group. Maybe we should do this, this, this. And we started to try to do a million things. And then we were literally poorly executing on all of them. Like it was a mess and we were so unorganized. We like never did anything with the newsletter. We just like, because we were trying to do way too many things at once rather than picking like a North Star and focusing on that. And so our like North Star metric is just like, I mean, are we building community? Because that's like the big goal with this, but also like, are we like, is a podcast growing in terms of like the listeners we have on each
And are
episode?
we getting better at physically
Yes.
being
And
podcasters?
are we getting better? Are we having fun? Are we enjoying it? Like, what are we doing here? Because I think you're right. Like, if we're trying to do a million different things, you're just not going to get as far with it. Rather, like, and I will say, I think we talked about this on the episode with the functional medicine doctor. I heard this advice when you want to like pick a focus, rather if you feel like, okay, there's a million things happening, I want to pick something to focus on, pick a different focus for each week or every 2 weeks or every month, depending on like how big that focus is, so that you're not getting diluted focus and you can get better results. But like, you know what I mean? If you have like a million things. So for us, maybe we're like, we're going to focus on this right now, like on growing our listeners. And then when we get to this point, we're going to focus on newsletter or whatever, and give yourself kind of like a focus for a certain period of time if you're feeling like you're focused on too many things and that's diluting your results.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this episode. This was a super fun one, and I feel like we could probably do another one of these episodes because we have like huge lists here and we could probably think of more. And I know every time we do kind of like life lessons episodes, we did a couple over the summer, like ideas, anything you want to see us cover on the podcast, please leave us feedback in Spotify, or you can DM us at the Life You Love Pod over on Instagram as well. But thank you guys for tuning into the podcast, and until next week.